There's a little-known part of Hollywood that most people are not aware of, known as the Audience Test Preview. The book, Audienceology, reveals this for the first time. Our podcast series, Don't Kill the Messenger, brings this book to life, taking a peek behind the curtain. And now, join author and entertainment research expert, Kevin Getz.
Studios and producers often look to books and short stories as source material for films and TV shows. But I would be hard-pressed to say that there is anyone in the industry that has done this as successfully as my guest today. In her career, studio executive Elizabeth Gabler has shepherded hit films including Life of Pi, The Devil Wears Prada, Hidden Figures, Marley and Me, Waiting to Exhale, and Where the Crawdads Sing. Her unmatched expertise in transforming literary works into cinematic success is a true testament to her vision and her leadership in the industry. Today, she is president of Sony 3000 Pictures, where she fostered an unprecedented and innovative multi-year media partnership between Sony Pictures and HarperCollins Publishers. Elizabeth, or as I call you, Beth, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Kevin. It is a delight to be with you, as always.
It's going to be fun and easy, I think, with us, as it always is.
It's always fun. It's always fun and easy.
We were just reminiscing before we got on about when we actually met. Now, you came into the business in the last year of the 70s as an agent's assistant, right?
Yeah, straight out of college. Had no intention of working in the entertainment industry at all.
Did not?
No, did not. It was a job that I got to basically pay my rent while I was studying for my GREs to get a master's degree in nonfiction writing.
Well, first of all, you got your undergrad degree in English literature, didn't you?
Correct, yes.
At UCSB. That's so interesting to me. And that is so in concert with everything that came afterwards.
True.
But you never got your master's, never did it.
No, I never did, because when I was there at ICM, my little desk was across the hallway from the script library for ICM, which at the time was definitely, along with William Morris Agency, one of the most powerful, probably the most internationally powerful agencies in the world. And I was pretty bored because my boss was always, before Zooms existed, running around town meeting with all the various producers and studio executives. So I would sit there and answer the phone. And being the avid reader that I was, because my mother taught me to read when I was 3 years old.
I picture little Elizabeth in her room, cuddled up in her bed with a book.
Yes, it's true. With my little nightlight, which caused me to have glasses when I was 8 years old. And then my mother also became a librarian later on in her life. So we were a very reading conscious family. And I was very excited to read all of those things in front of me, which were the scripts of all the clients that ICM represented. So
hold on, before we go there, hold on. 3 books. Give me 3 names of, I'm talking early Elizabeth reading that had an influence on you.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, one of them would be definitely Little Women.
Oh, yes.
Definitely Wind in the Willows.
Oh.
And probably the earlier ones were the Winnie the Pooh books. I was a very big fan of English children's books. So there were so many that I became, Harriet the Spy was one of my favorites. The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler was one of my favorites. I just love stories, even going back to the Boxcar Children, of children in adventures.
What about your own daughter?
We probably read a lot of books about horses for her.
Did she read a lot of what you read?
No, she was a much more visual type of child and more visually and artistically motivated. She's a photographer. She's a fine artist. Actually, she was much more of a film watcher.
Who got who into horses?
Oh, I was obsessed with horses from my earliest days. The Marguerite Henry books were Misty of Chincoteague and just all of the horse books that you could possibly get your hands on as a child. I was completely...
And you did Western or English, by the way?
English, yes.
Always.
English writing.
Annalise also?
Annalise also.
And you both competed, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
Incredible. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this year you lost your dear husband, Lee.
Yes, thank you.
Annalise's dad. And oh, Lord, he was such a titan in the industry. Can you just tell us a minute about Lee?
Well, Lee was an amazing force of nature. And very protective of both Annalise and I. One of the many gifts that he gave us was to build this magnificent horse farm where we live in Santa Barbara, California. And it's home to 3 pigs, 2 miniature horses, 2 ponies, and then 4 of my horses. Plus, we have a rooster, 3 chickens, a rabbit, and we have Chardonnay grapes, coffee growing here, avocados growing here. But it's my sanity.
You were about to come down here to do this in person. How could you ever leave the gorgeousness of what you just described?
Well, I have a very beautiful office on the Sony lot, which was the original schoolhouse for the MGM child stars.
Judy Garland and
And
Mickey Rooney and all those guys.
Elizabeth Taylor.
Ah,
Elizabeth Taylor. And it is a historical building. It's a beautiful little adobe bungalow that has a lot of the original features. I believe the doors are all original. I know the fireplace in my office is original because I actually have a photograph of Elizabeth Taylor sitting amongst her schoolmates at a desk in my very office, and that fireplace is in the back.
Did you have to lobby Tom Rothman to get it, or did he just give it to
No,
you?
he gave it to me as he had it waiting for me. He wanted me to be in there. He had been in there for a while.
Well, you and I have a mutual love affair with Tom Rothman, so let's talk about Tom. He's had a major influence on you.
He has. He is my mentor, and he has been a guiding light and a friend for a very long time.
Well, you've done good by him. He's done good by you. And you've maintained this trust and affinity for each other for so many years. And I got to see it up close and personal. There's some great stories in my new book coming out next September called How to Score in Hollywood, where both you and Tom, from your own perspectives, share how you got certain movies made, like Life of Pi, which we're going to get into a little later on. For the moment, I want to ask you now, you enter Hollywood. You are an agent's assistant at ICM. You become a studio development executive. How?
I realized that my heart was really into the creative process as opposed to the deal-making process. And I was sad when a script would be optioned of one of the clients and go off to all these other people to work on. And I realized that my natural inclination was to stay involved in the creative process. And so I was very lucky to get a job as a creative executive at Columbia Pictures during a time when they were incredibly active. My first year there, they made 22 feature films. And this was directors ranging from Ivan Reitman doing the original Ghostbusters film to the original Karate Kid film to Norman Jewison directing, and then a lot of first-time directors. They were really running the gamut of filmmakers there. My first dailies that I watched down in the screening room with the head of production and the head of post-production, who were also mentors of mine and taught me a great deal, were the dailies of Brian De Palma's Body Double. So try and cut your teeth on that one. Anyway, it was amazing. It was like going to film school. So I did a lot of script notes. I kept track of all the development of all the various executives. I watched the dailies, and it was really an amazing experience where I was completely in love with my job, and I absolutely immersed myself in every aspect of it. I went to work on the weekends, and I loved every second of it.
Who was the first person in our business who saw the brilliance of Elizabeth Gabler?
I don't know if they saw the brilliance, but I can tell you that somebody who was still to this day, and a very dear friend and also a very strong role model to me was the producer, Lauren Schuler Donner.
Oh, yes.
One of my first movies that I got to be the baby executive on was Joel Schumacher's St. Elmo's Fire, starring the Brat Pack. Lauren was a producer, and I just got to see an amazing woman at work every day, fighting for her film, being an advocate for her filmmaker, taking care of all these young stars, and really caring so much about the story that was about to be brought into the world. And I think that film really created an entire genre of films, basically coming out of it, which was the coming of age of 20-something people in our society, and went on to be, I think, one of the first of many films that are just classics to this day. And obviously working at a studio like that, where you got to see so many different kinds of filmmakers, I was exposed to every kind of cinematic style, editorial style, to the way they dealt with actors, and literally learning what was the difference between one take and another when a director would do 10 takes that looked to me like they were exactly the same, but they weren't. So it was a tremendous education, and I loved it. And then a very powerful and wonderful producer by the name of Jerry Weintraub, a legend in his own right, was called upon to restart United Artists Studios, which was basically a library of amazing films, for everything from the Bond films to Billy Wilder's films, The Apartment.
Rocky.
Yep. He brought in some really amazing people and offered me a job, and I took it. And we started up our little United Artists, and he made actually a consulting deal with Billy Wilder himself, who had an office in the building in Beverly Hills
On Little Santa Monica.
on Roxbury and Santa Monica. Yeah.
Never that. You walk up there, right? And it was a 2-story, and so many others were in there. Remember, Dan Petrie was in there, and so many legends.
It was amazing. And so we were just so excited to be re-energizing this legendary studio. And Billy would have us all sit in his office and have basically a masterclass on story development. However, we learned quickly that we could never schedule a meeting at any time after we had Billy, because we would keep the poor people waiting in the lobby reception area for hours at a time, because we couldn't interrupt him. We couldn't say we had to leave. So we had to sit there and be really nervous, because we knew that someone was out there waiting for us for a meeting that wasn't anywhere near about to start.
Oh,
It was truly great. And some wonderful, wonderful films came out of the 3 years of United Artists. I mean, now to this day alone, Roadhouse has been remade. Presumed Innocent was a book that we bought and put together. Both of those actually starring Jake Gyllenhaal,
all right.
coincidentally. But Mrs. Doubtfire came out of that, which was actually...
Mrs. Doubtfire came out of that time?
It did. It was an English children's book, going back to the subject of book adaptations, written by a wonderful woman named Anne Fine, who wrote educational books for young adults and children. And it was a story that she wrote to teach kids about the effects of divorce, and all wrapped up in this great story about this father who disguises himself as a nanny so he can get a job so he can see his children. And that traveled with me to my next job, which was at 20th Century Fox.
How did it travel with you?
Well, it was there. And at the time, after 3 years,
It was at United Artists.
it was at United Artists, yes. And Kirk Kerkorian, the last 2 films of United Artists were ironically Roadhouse and Rain Man, both of which I worked on, and was left there as the last executive as the studio was being sold. And I was there to basically finish those films. And our head of production, a wonderful man by the name of Roger Birnbaum, was going to 20th Century Fox
Terrific
to take over
guy.
as head of production. And Roger, another mentor of mine, said, I want you to come, but you need to stay and finish these 2 films. And so I did. And then I joined him at 20th Century Fox. And since the United Artists studio was basically being dismantled, films like Presumed Innocent went to Warner Brothers. Prince of Tides, which was another one of our wonderful projects, went to Columbia. And luckily for me, I got to take my little children's book that no one paid any attention to, Mrs. Doubtfire, called Alias Madame Doubtfire, and take it to Fox with me, where we developed it.
It was a massive hit.
It was, but at the time, no one wanted to do it. I couldn't even get a writer.
Were you the one that got Robin on it?
Yes, but it was very difficult to get anyone to actually write it to begin with, because it was very close to the time when Tootsie had come out, and people thought
It was
that
a,
it was
it was a
supposed to
kind of like
Tootsie.
a Me Too version of
Kind of,
Tootsie.
yeah. And also they couldn't understand how the mother, who was played by Sally Field in the film, obviously wouldn't recognize him. And I would say, it's a movie. There's makeup people. They'll make him look different. And indeed they did.
I would have that concern when I was reading it, because I know that is certainly a pink flag. You'd say if you didn't buy that, your movie wouldn't work. So clearly it must have been something that you had to take great pains at getting right.
Well, over the years, yeah, we had a wonderful screenwriter, Randy Mamesinger, who was brave enough to take it on, and she was fantastic. And then the magical, wonderful Chris Columbus came in. He was very passionate about it. He was a very dedicated father, loved the entire idea of the movie. We had conversations with Robin and his wife, Marcia, about the project, and said, hey, will you just guys meet this wonderful director who had just finished Home Alone 2? And they said, sure. So he went over and met with them at the Bel Air Hotel where they were staying. They didn't live in Los Angeles. And they all saw eye to eye, and it was a friendship that has lasted to this day with
Wow.
obviously with Morgan.
Were you at that meeting?
No, I was not. I was sitting at home, lighting candles and crossing my fingers and saying prayers to the movie gods.
You knew if Robin said yes, you'd have a movie.
I knew they would love Chris because everybody loves Chris. And so there was no question in my mind that it was going to be a wonderful meeting of the minds.
He really caught the tone just perfectly because it could be very juvenile, but it wasn't. It was a 4-quadrant movie.
Well, because no one could control Robin. And a lot of it, if you look at it now, which it definitely holds up all these years later, and it came out in 1993. So it's been 31 years since that movie was made and released. And actually, interestingly enough, Chris's vision was so powerful that the very first cut that he showed us was almost the released cut of the movie. It made so few changes.
I worked on it, and I remember it being a nearly perfect movie when you finally tested it.
It was.
You love test audiences, don't you?
I do. Well, in that particular one, Kevin, if you remember, people actually fell out of their chairs into the aisles of the theater because they were laughing so hard. And I think that the first family test screening we had of it was 100% for everybody almost. It was across the board. It was, I don't remember ever getting 100%. And since.
I think you might have on Marley and Me or Devil Wears Prada, but that was years later.
Yes, it was.
Let's face it, you've had some good scores, girl.
We have.
Beth, you've had some good testing scores. So that's why when Elizabeth doesn't get these really stellar scores on each and every movie, it eats at her because she knows that we got to get them there. Because she knows the power of the word of mouth. I mean, she's witnessed it. She's been there, and you've been an amazing advocate of the audience and a tremendous supporter of the work that I've done over the years. And we've worked so beautifully together.
We have. We oftentimes will not do a screening if Kevin is not available and wait until he is.
I know you've
Not
done
that the rest of your team is wonderful, but there's a certain magic you have.
Well, it's a subtext that you and I have too, that we know these are the areas that the audience is really bringing to light, and we have to communicate that to the people making the movie. Hey, before we leave United Artists, a call out to Scott Stuber and Nick Nesbitt, who are now reinvigorating the label. Yet again, I had dinner this weekend also with Paula Wagner, and Tom Cruise also with Paula had reinvigorated the label, and others have as well. And it's such a great brand, and I love that it's in great hands yet again.
Yeah.
You did move to Fox and had the most success of your career. You were there for how many years in total?
Fox, 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, 20 of them were Fox 2000.
Now, why did they give you your own label? I mean, other than the fact that you had hit after hit, I guess I just answered my own question. But how do you see it?
I think that they started the various divisions of 20th Century Fox in 1994. And Laura Ziskin, who is a magnificent person and a wonderful producer, was the first person to run Fox 2000. But the problem is that they had never truly given it an identity of its own to differentiate it, not only to the town, but to the other divisions within the company itself.
It's really true, because they went from everywhere like Fight Club to Pushing Tin to Ravenous to Anna and the King of Siam.
Yes.
I mean, that's not a consistent brand. It was almost a mid-range budgetary level as opposed to a consumer-facing identity, right?
Well, I think that's absolutely true, Kevin. And I think that part of the problem was that they were making movies that did not have big concepts, but that were more expensive than they should have been. So that was falling in between the cracks of what the main Fox division was and what the Searchlight division was. And so there was a very, very wonderful team of executives that.
Oh my gosh, Kevin McCormick, right? Alec Gardner.
Yeah, I mean, they were all amazing. But what I was going to say was at the main division of Fox, which was being run by Tom Rothman, there were 4 of us.
Let's name their names, by the way.
Okay, their names are Hutch Parker, Peter Rice, and Sanford Panitch.
Wait, and also Chris Meledandri.
And Chris. Chris was running the family division. The 4 of us were the senior executives in the main film division.
And you've all had such lousy careers. I'm so sorry for you.
We had terrible times, yes, and we still can't stand each other. Actually, I have a beautiful picture of the 4 of us in costume for Tom Rothman's 70th birthday party, which was held in New York. about a month ago. So it was a reunion for all
Wasn't
of
it
us.
the
but
Rainbow Room?
It was at the Rainbow Room. Yeah. Yeah. And guess who I dressed up as?
Mrs. Doubtfire?
No.
Prada?
Randa
I
Priestley.
said,
And
I knew it, I knew it.
my
Okay,
daughter
second guess,
Annalise
second
was
guess.
Andy Sachs.
Who
So
was?
my daughter, Annie. Annalise was Andy. She was Anne Hathaway's character.
Oh my God.
She was my minion.
So you did the whole silver-haired swirl?
I did. Yes, I
Oh.
did. Yeah. And our wonderful coordinator at 3000 Pictures, James Gelberg, made a mock-up of Runway magazine for us to carry around. So we had our own magazine book.
We went to his lacrosse thing the night before. He was honored by Harlem Lacrosse Club.
Oh, right.
Many of you don't know, but Tom Rothman was an All-American at Brown in lacrosse, and to this day is a passionate advocate for lacrosse. So we digress. You're at Fox. How do you define the label when you get there?
Well, I first of all had to sift through a lot of the existing projects.
No. What did
And
they want you to do? What was the goal of?
it wasn't defined what I was supposed to do, but I went there and I thought, there are 125 projects here, and let's see what's good. One thing that I found was that a lot of the projects were kind of lying fallow in development that wasn't going anywhere. So it was really good for me to be able to liberate those, to give them back to their producers, directors, and screenwriters to let them have another life in the world. However, there were definitely some of them. One of them, called Someone Like You, was based on a book called Animal Husbandry, which was being produced by the wonderful, may she rest in peace, late Linda Obst. And we put this movie together with Tony Goldwyn directing it, Hugh Jackman and Ashley Judd. And it was a delicious little romantic comedy. It was a lot of fun to make. It made money. And look who was in it, just at the beginnings of their stardom. And anyway, so that was one. And then another was this wonderful, absolutely captivating project called Unfaithful. And Adrian
Lyne, yes.
Adrian had been attached to it. He had not agreed with Laura Ziskin on the path that the movie should take. So he left the project. But when I came, he said, can I come back and make that movie? And so we did. We made it. And I think he did an extraordinary job. Very proud of it.
Diane Lane.
And Richard Gere.
And Richard Gere.
And Olivier Martinez was the poor murdered love affair. But it was absolutely mesmerizing to work on.
And that movie also really caught on.
It did. Yeah. And to this day, people say they want another Unfaithful. It sort of became one of those touchstone movies because those kind of very hard to find. Those wonderful, sexy thrillers where one person makes a mistake that they regret and the movie is about those consequences. But those were done very brilliantly in the day by the wonderful Sherry Lansing.
Who I know you revere like I do.
I do. Yes, I do. So that was another one that was part of the old Laura group. And then I did bring some films over from...
We called it Big Fox, right?
One of them was Castaway, which was an original film, not an adaptation. And that was something that was a one-line idea of Tom Hanks's. And I had been blessed to be the executive in charge of his production deal when his production deal was at Fox. And we found a brilliant writer, Bill Broyles, who absolutely understand Tom's motivation for wanting to turn this idea into a film about him being stuck on a desert island. And then we were absolutely, I mean, the blessing of all time was to have Tom reunite with Bob Zemeckis, and Bob came on, and the movie took 3 years to make. He was shut down after the first period of filming for a year and a half, made an entire film called What Lies Beneath, starring Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer.
For DreamWorks.
Not only did he shoot it, he did post, and it was released. But it was a co-production between DreamWorks and Fox, as was Castaway, because Bob had just made a big deal. His big production deal for Image Movers was just brand new at DreamWorks, and they said, let's join forces, and you guys have half of this one, and we'll have half of the other one. And so that's what they did. And so I was the executive on both from the Fox side, and clearly I was the main executive on Castaway since I'd been on it from the inception. And so that's exactly what happened. So the movie was shot in 2 parts.
Wasn't it to do with it losing weight, though?
Part of it was that, yes, it was definitely that.
Because he was on the desert island. You shot the first half first.
Yes.
Then he lost the weight, and then
He knocked his tooth out, and that went to black, and that was the first half, and then came back and shot the second half.
my God, when we come back, we're going to talk to Elizabeth more about Fox and some of the other great movies that she worked on. We'll be back in a moment. Listeners, the Motion Picture and Television Fund is a nonprofit charitable organization that supports working and retired members of the entertainment community. This wonderfully run organization offers assistance for living and aging with dignity and purpose in the areas of health and social services, including temporary financial assistance, case management, and residential living, and has been a crucial lifeline to thousands during and beyond the strikes. To learn more, visit mptf.com. Please join me in helping others in our industry during times of need. There are so many ways to offer support and get involved. Thank you. We're back with the incomparable Elizabeth Gabler. Elizabeth, I have to again ask you about some of your other movies because we could spend an entire episode on Castaway. But I'm going to give you a few other names of movies, and I want to sort of do a TV guide version of those so we don't feel like we've left something out. First, Marley and Me.
Yes.
How did it come to be?
It came to be because I read the book. I am an obsessive dog person. My dogs are like my children, and I love the book so much. And I could see that it was going to be a huge book. And I felt like it was a story about a family and about two people falling in love and starting this family. And there's actually a line that Jennifer Aniston says where I think Owen's character says, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." And she says, "No, it wasn't, but this is so much better." And that's what I felt was that was about this life bringing you all these amazing gifts in the form of love and laughter. And I felt like it was an amazing message, too, to bring into the world.
Weren't you worried that it was going to be so sad that you were going to alienate people? I was inconsolable, by the way. I didn't think I could do the focus group after that test because I was so devastated.
It was about life, though. It was about the family was given this gift of this amazing dog who was a mischievous, giant troublemaker, but filled with love and loyalty to this family. And I felt like it was a message to the world of the gifts that animals can bring to us.
And that love, even to experience the level of depth of love for that short period, I always say it's God's cruel joke to give us these dogs in our lives for such a short period of time, outweighs any of the pain of the loss, because that you do get on with your life. Thankfully, the human body is designed to ultimately do that. But the love, as you said, the laughter, and there are just so many memories and things that come from that. I understand. I agree that superseded it. But that's not the first time you were up against how the heck is this going to work? How the heck is this going to be successful? Life of Pi.
Well, that was a big one.
Well, it was a big one that almost never happened.
It's true. It took a long time.
And according to Tom, but for the fact that you had the vision, had the tenacity, had the tears shed in his office, it wouldn't have gotten made. Tell us about it.
It was a book that I read when it was first published. And again, going back to the theme of the human-animal connection and survival, which I have seemingly helped work on a few films, I should say. They were made by many people that had the central theme of human strength and human survivability in unforeseen and difficult circumstances. The bond of the character with the tiger and the fact that the two of them helped each other to survive this incredible ordeal on the open seas was something that stayed with me. The book was published. I thought it was really a difficult adaptation, but it didn't stay out of my mind. It stayed with me. And I basically figured, okay, let's try and develop this project. So we did. And we had a couple of different filmmakers on the movie and just didn't seem to come together in a way that was doable. It was such an incredibly difficult film to actually execute. And then we heard that Ang Lee was possibly interested in it. And I went and met with him, and his first question to me was, why would a studio ever want to make this movie? And I said, well, a studio wouldn't make this movie with very many filmmakers. In fact, there are probably about 3, and you're one of them. So if you are indeed interested in this movie and you are willing to take this giant risk to make this movie, then we should talk about it. So he wanted to think about it. He had other commitments. And I said, look, until you tell me no, I'm not going to give up, and I'm not going to go to anybody else. The day you say no, I'll give up. But as long as you keep saying, let me think about it, we're going to hold. And so he did 8 months later say, I'm willing to look into getting a writer and doing a script. And so we had a writer in mind. I thought that this magnificent writer, David Magee, would be perfect for this project.
Why was that?
Well, he had done a movie called Finding Neverland, which was basically a wonderful adaptation with a child protagonist.
And a fantasy element.
Yes, a fantasy element. And I knew that he would understand the complexities of it. He also, just from a practical nature, lived in New Jersey, and Ang was in New York. And I didn't think that a very long distance relationship between writer and director, especially with the strength and passion of Ang's vision, would be a good idea. So just from a logistical point of view, they were right there next to each other. And I thought, well, okay, at least they'll be able to be together while this is being created. And it turned out to be the case. Very symbiotic relationship between the two of them. David's skill as a writer, skill with adaptation, his genuine gentleness and thoughtfulness and respect for Ang and his ability to collaborate was all so pitch perfect. And we then, with the beautiful script, had to figure out how to actually make the film.
Well, so wait, I want to go back to something, though. I know that tears were involved. I mentioned that. And you had to finally go into Tom and sort of beg him.
Well, that was later. If the begging happened after we had the script and we were trying to come up with our production plan, and it was in 3D, and it was a very advanced form of 3D that Ang was working on that I, to this day, couldn't explain to you, but I just trusted it that he knew what he was doing, and that all of our amazing Academy Award-winning visual effects team would know what they were doing too. And they told me that it was just too difficult. The degree of difficulty was too much of a risk, and I should let it go. And I had to call Ang. He was in Taiwan at the time. And I called him and said, I'm giving the movie back to you. I'm sure someone in town will make it. It's just, we can't do it at Fox. And he said, no, I'm not letting you say no. I'm getting on a plane right now. And he flew to LA. And with him, he had a pre-visualization of the freighter sinking, the beginning of the whole story. And it was almost frame for frame what the actual film became. And it was even scored. It was scored. So you looked like you were watching drawings of a movie, but in cinematic live action. And he also had the audition tape of our young actor who became our pie, Serge. And it was just Serge reading a survival manual. So it was a monologue of him reading a raft, life raft survival manual, and of him playing the drums, watching this beautiful young Indian woman dance and his facial expressions. So I said, okay, I called Tom and Jim Giannopoulos and I said, you need to meet me in the screening room. We had our heads of marketing. We had our wonderful head of international, our physical production and post-production executives there. And Ang showed them what I just explained to you. And a wonderful man named Tony Sella, who was the head of marketing, stood up in his chair and said, there's no way we're not making this movie. And they said, okay.
I love Tony Sella. We need to just acknowledge him. I'm still very close with Tony. I see him often. He is the best, man.
He was a champion of it.
Not only was he a champion, though, but he made it come to life.
He did.
He was one of the most, if not the best, creative advertising executive that I've ever worked with.
And I can echo that with full feeling. So they said, yeah. And I think they told us we had to cut $30 million out of the budget or something crazy like that. And so we did.
All right. My favorite movie of yours, maybe, but I've had a few. I mean, I had to think Mrs. Doubtfire or Devil Wears Prada.
Yes.
I mean, It was perfection.
It was,
Perfection.
to this day, still holds up.
And by
I
the
can
way,
tell.
Tony Sella, that one sheet, was one of the
Yeah.
most genius one sheets I have ever seen. I don't know the vendor on it, but I can tell you that Tony ultimately was the deciding factor of this Prada high heel shoe with the devil's pitchfork. Oh, my Lord. But Devil Wears Prada was just magical. How did it all come together? And I know that David Frankel is the director who I just think has the greatest touch.
Yes, he does. And it was basically a 50-page partial manuscript when we bought it that Wendy Feineman brought to us. And my colleague Carla Hacken was very rabid about it. She was a young fashionista of a studio executive. And we decided to take a shot on it, even though we didn't know what the ultimate book, Lauren Weisberger's book, was going to be. But the title was so good and the idea was so good that we started developing it. So what happened at the time was we had draft after draft of the script. It was a very difficult adaptation because the book itself, as charming and great as it is, did not have a cinematic narrative.
Interesting.
It didn't really move from one point to the next. And the third act of the book was much different than the third act of the movie ultimately became. So Wendy said, you've got to meet this director, David Frankel. You've got to meet this director, David Frankel. So David Frankel flies out from New York. We have this meeting at Fox. He didn't really want to do the movie. She just sort of dragged him out there. But by the end of the meeting, he did want to do the movie. And there was no question that he was the director. We wanted to do the movie. So we continued to develop it, brought in Aline Brosh McKenna because she was really willing to sink her teeth in. We had had a number of writers who were basically working on it for periods of time.
And probably too beholden to the book itself.
Well, yeah, and it was one of those that basically Tom Rothman mentioned again here, kept saying, you guys have a melting ice cube. If anyone makes a movie about the fashion business, you're done. You better get this going. So it was really pedal to the metal the whole time. And I also felt like, we talked about a lot of different people that we thought would be amazing playing the role of Miranda Priestley, but there was one, obviously, iconic actress who was the wish list of the wish lists, and that was Meryl Streep. And so we did go to Meryl, and she did meet with David, and she did say to David, I trust you to get the script right, but I'm in. And then Anne Hathaway, Annie had wanted to play Andy Sachs. She had about 60 meetings with us. She gave us notes. She was so passionate about it. Finally, we went to Tom and said, Tom, it's Anne Hathaway. She's got to do this part. And he said, okay, go make this movie. And so we did. And at the time, I knew that David would need some help. The movie was in New York. There was so much risk. Like, it had to be great. We had to do the right job for Meryl Streep. We had to. And so I thought, you know what?
And the Emily Blunt casting was kind of genius, wasn't it?
Yes, and Emily actually had been up for a role, and her first position was to test for a movie we were making based on this wildly successful YA book called Aragon. And they had first dibs on her because she had just done a screen test. And David Frankel said, I want to cast Emily Blunt as Emily. And I said, well, you can't because we're waiting to see what the director thinks on this other movie. So he picked somebody else, the Aragon director. And I said to Emily, I go, well, look, you could be sitting in a field in the mud in Budapest, or you could be in New York with Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway and David Frankel shooting The Devil Wears Prada. I think you got a good deal here. And of course, and then Stanley came along, and it was just a magical cast. Everybody was wonderful. And anyway, so I thought, well, let's bring in another wonderful person to join this team. And Karen Rosenfeld, who is a phenomenal studio executive.
One of the best, I just want to say, in story and in script.
Yes, and also a complete person of utter calm and composure in the most crazy situations. The first one on the set, last to leave, advocate to the filmmaker, understood the studio system, had been one of my colleagues at United Artists, had been president of Paramount Production for years. And I just knew she was going to be a great asset to the team, and she was. And also came on Marley and Me and many other movies that I've worked on with her and had the blessing of working with her on. But one of my first friends in the business, so I would consider her a sister in many ways. Anyway, so that's what happened with Prada.
Wow. Okay. Tell me a project that got away from you.
Oh, one of my first and most.
Look at, she didn't even pause, folks. She has regrets. All those blessings.
I actually did. It broke my heart. Was Clueless. I developed Clueless from a television pilot with Amy Heckerling at Fox. I read it as a writing sample. It wasn't called Clueless. It was just the idea of this girl in Beverly Hills. And I said, do you ever think about doing this as a movie? And she said, yeah, I know exactly what I want to do. And I want to do the plot of Emma. And I said, oh, I'll do that with you. So we embarked upon the development of what was called many things, including No Worries at one point, and Clueless was the ultimate title. But what happened was we had everything. We had a screen test for Alicia Silverstone. She wanted to cast Paul Rudd. We had a $13 million budget, and no one at Fox would make it. So I had to put it in turnaround.
You couldn't make that, but you made all these much bigger movies. No one saw it. They saw it as too limited an audience. Teen girls.
They didn't know what it was. They just thought it was about a bratty girl in Beverly Hills. But it was as vivid as, I mean, maybe not the actual script that got made.
Yeah, but
Scott
the movie that I
Rudin-
tested kind of took off right from the get-go. It worked. It
Yes.
worked right out of the gate. It was almost its new language.
No, it was a completely new language. And one of my friends who I knew from my writing career, my competitive writing career, was a young teenager who went to Beverly Hills High. And I asked her if she would let Amy go to school with her and shadow her to see what the high school was like. And she did. So it was very real in a lot of ways, but it was with this magical Amy Heckerling fairy dust.
When Clueless came out, did you go and say na 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 na?
Kind of, yeah.
Good. Any others that come to mind? Things that you didn't maybe win in an auction or in a bidding war?
The Horse Whisperer.
Oh, I love that movie.
Oh, that was my.
Oh, of
I
course.
still say to this day to the wonderful agent Matt Snyder, and he still knows that that one broke my heart.
Instead, you made Flicka.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, remade Flicka.
You've had, as I said, throughout this interview, just such great success. What's one of the biggest mistakes you've made, and what did you learn from it?
Well, it would have happened a couple of times, but the incidents were spread out far enough to where you sort of think, okay, it'll be all right. But it's a very clear thing, and that is what is on the page goes on the stage. It's always get that script, because no matter what, if you're chasing a good screenplay while you're in production, you're headed for a big headache at the end of the line.
All mistakes are
And-
made in pre-production.
It's two things. One, you will absolutely see what the filmmaker's vision is, and maybe their vision is brilliant, but if it's not the thing that you think you can make into a successful film, then you have two different ways of making a movie, and that's always difficult.
I just want to say one thing. Candidly, you have said to me, there have been times when we've worked on movies and you've said to me, basically, God damn it, I knew this. I said this. I
I
gave
don't
the
say
notes.
those words, Kevin.
Sorry, I'll tone it down.
Gosh darn it,
Gosh
Kevin.
darn it. Damn it to heck.
Rats.
Rats. Egads. So you'd say to me, I knew that was in the script. That was a script thing.
Yes,
It just happens.
it does happen.
But you've learned, being a veteran in this, that you can't say that because you just have to fix it. You just have to.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. Wow. Great. I'm going to steal that.
And also, I think that just knowing that you have the same vision as the filmmaker.
Where the crawdad sing, moving on to your next iteration at Sony and HarperCollins. Wow. That is something else. That movie was made for how much-ish?
Low 30s,
And it grossed how much worldwide?
140 million, I think, a little bit more than
Now
that.
that's a wonderful piece of business.
It was a very profitable film.
Good for you.
A delight to make in every way. I had the most wonderful experience working on it with such an amazing team.
Led by Reese, right? Wasn't Reese very much a part of that?
Reese and Lauren Neustadter, absolutely.
Terrific gals.
Yes. Reese had picked it as her book pick. Actually, the author, Delia Owens, had only written nonfiction. And I developed one of her nonfiction books about her life in Africa as a conservationist. And her husband at the time and Delia were living in Africa protecting the elephants. And it was called Eye of the Elephant. It never got made, but ultimately I was so excited to see that finally she had written a novel when I saw that Reese had picked Where the Crawdads Sing as her book pick that month. And I read it immediately. And I called Lauren, who is a dear friend, and said, both of them are, but I called Lauren, Reese's producer, and said, are you interested in developing this as a movie? And she said, well, we're not doing it, but we can. And I said, well, would you want to do it with us? And she said, yeah, absolutely. So those two great producers and our little division at
Wonderful.
Sony joined forces. Actually, it was at Fox at the time before it was sold to Disney, but we all joined forces at Sony because we brought the project over there and just found Olivia Newman, this amazing director who had the same vision as we did for it. And it was a labor of love, the whole thing. It was made during COVID. We shot it in New Orleans. Daisy Edgar Jones was a brave trooper on that movie, and she weathered the storms of all kinds,
Great.
weather and the swamps and everything like that. But it was truly a lovely experience, and I was very supported by all of the teams at Sony. The marketing and publicity teams around the world were incredible. Tom obviously was right there at the helm, steering the release and everything like that. So it turned out to be a success story for us and one that was very joyful.
And Josh did a beautiful campaign.
Josh Greenstein was right there. Yeah, absolutely.
Just a great campaign. I want to mention Clara and the Sun as something that is your current project that you're working on, directed by the wonderful Taika Waititi. And tell us about that. What do we have to look forward to?
We are very excited. It is a very unique film. It is a very magical film. It's had some transformations over the course of time in its post-production period. He's a genius. He's a very innovative filmmaker. He's like a child in so many ways because of curiosity and his imagination.
Truly brilliant. Yeah, truly brilliant.
Yes, but on the set, he is a general and he has his amazing teams of people. So he's very focused. First one there, just on the set with the actors. He's an actor himself, so he's very, very involved in performance, beautiful aesthetic. And he tried some things originally that were very, very interesting, but I think has now made the decision to step back from some of the more imaginative choices that he made. And
that's also part of the brilliance, though, being able to have that 35,000-foot view and say, what's best for the overall arc of this thing? That's so interesting.
Absolutely. Well, the film stars Jenna Ortega and Amy Adams, and Jenna is absolutely a revelation. I mean, I think people who've been seeing her work in Wednesday and in Beetlejuice, and other films that she's done will see this luminous presence on screen as this artificial friend who is very much, very human-like in her qualities and has empathy and is an empath, and how she is bought by this family. Amy Adams is the mother. A young English actress, Mia Tharia, is the young girl who purchases her as her artificial friend. And it's the way that Clara's character basically heals and saves this family. And it's very emotional.
Elizabeth, what is the theme here of family? I mean, seriously, so many of your movies have this thing about family and the connection of family. Has that ever sort of dawned on you?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm not being goofy when I say that. I'm trying to really think what your leitmotif is, and I think that we might have just hit on it.
That's definitely, I'm the oldest of 6 children. We're a very close family, and I think that it's one of the most definitely emotionally prevalent things of my life. And themes that I've always wanted to explore in movies.
And having Annalise, and that's how you know you go back with someone so far when you went through the pregnancy and so forth, and saw all of that stuff from up close. And I want to also, again, bring up Lee and tell us how you're doing with that. He was such a great partner for so many years, a great dad, as you said, so protective.
Yeah.
You doing all right?
Yeah. Yes and no. You're never all right when you experience a loss of that magnitude and a sudden loss. It's been 6 months since Lee left us, and I miss him every minute. And he was my biggest champion. He was my fiercest guardian. He protected me. He protected our family. And so I'm kind of forging on alone. And every day I look at the heavens and say, what should I do now? And I feel like he's there. And then sometimes I feel like he's not there. So it's very difficult. But my work has been a tremendous salvation. My Sony family has been a tremendous support system. My friends, both in the industry and outside the industry, have been a godsend. And my daughter is an amazing person. And she's her father's girl. And I feel like she's my partner and my best friend. And I feel very, very grateful that she is so strong and such a wonderful young woman in her own right. And I know a lot of that is because she had such a close relationship with her father, too. So it was a gift that he gave me that is priceless and eternal.
Well, I hope that you'll consider me part of that extended family, because
I do.
This has been such a pleasure for me, and you've been an inspiration for so many young people and for the art industry, and you've given us so many memorable, important films, and I couldn't be more grateful, and I love you very much.
Well, I love you too, and I have relied upon you and your wisdom and your insight and your command of what audiences around the world want, time after time after time, with the deepest gratitude. And that will always be there. And I can tell you that so many of the successes that you just mentioned of mine, you had no small role in. So I want to shout out to you about your particular skill that is just unmatched in our industry, and how grateful we all are for you.
Thank you so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much.
So all you listening here, take a word from this guy. He's one of the smartest ones around.
To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed our interview today. For other stories like this one, please check out my book, Audienceology, at Amazon or through my website at kevingets360.com. You can also always follow me on my social media. Next time on Don't Kill the Messenger, I'll welcome veteran producer David Permit. Until then, I'm Kevin Getz, and to you, our listeners, I appreciate you being part of the movie-making process. Your opinions matter.